Let's go. Streaming data free on the MTN network in South Africa.
This is Omnisport.
T's and C's apply.
The Premier League and Man City feel they've both won in court this week, but why? Why do they both feel, and how can it be a five? It's a 5-5 draw somehow in their minds. Lassana Diarra has won in court as well, but what does it mean in terms of the transfer market? And why does South Africa not play a 5-test match series at home anymore? Is it all just about the money? Africa's leading sports business analyst, Nqobile Ndlovu, Mr. Cash and Sport, will join us now to discuss all of that. Nqobile, thanks for joining us, bro. Let's start with the EPL. Man City has won the tribunal judgment against the Premier League. What does this mean, and what is the summary of the ruling?
MKT, good morning. So what does it mean? Well, Manchester City took the Premier League to court, challenging what are called APT rules, party rules. And this basically means that they were challenging the rules that state that you cannot have inflated or sponsorships related to people associated with your club. And Manchester City took those rules to court, and ultimately the summary is that the Premier League won some elements because Manchester City had 8 challenges to those rules, and Manchester City essentially won 2. So, but the ones that Manchester City won are pretty big. So it's pretty much a draw. It's almost like it's as you said in your throw forward. It's pretty much a draw in terms of who comes out on top. But the ramifications for the Premier League are pretty stark and pretty large, because they will now essentially have to rewrite some of the APT rules in order to comply with the law, basically.
And what is APT exactly? Because, I mean, you know, corporates love these 3-letter acronyms as though everybody knows what they are. And it's like, it makes you feel smarter. But what is it for the layman, just so we can all understand?
Yeah, so simply put, APT is associated party transactions. Associated party is basically anyone associated with the club, either an owner or majority shareholder. What would happen is that these people would inject money into the club to allow the club to do their transfer dealings, and they would inject money through usually very low interest or zero interest loans. What then happened is that when the league made a decision in 2021 to amend these rules after Newcastle's takeover by the Saudis, they at the time had wanted to inject money into Newcastle through a sponsorship which was from Visit Saudi. That sponsorship was knocked back. The league then amended these associated party transaction rules and said, you cannot just unilaterally throw money into a club. There has to be fair market value for these sponsorships. And we have to adjudicate that these sponsorships are fair market value. Otherwise, you could just say, for instance, MKT has a football team. MKT has a company. I just want to sponsor my team, and I'll throw in a front of shirt sponsorship, which is R1 billion a year. There is no other club that's getting R1 billion for front of shirt sponsorship. But how can you then say that's fair market value? So essentially, that's what the Premier League was trying to do, was to try and equalize the playing field in terms of what you could pay as a sponsor for sponsorship, and also the extent to which owners could fund the clubs that they own.
No, I love that description, you know, because the other side of that coin is that I've heard rumblings. I remember reading some articles that Newcastle and obviously the Emiratis at Man City, they feel that it's an anti sort of Arabic money sentiment is what they feel, because they felt like the Premier League is trying to deliberately block these oil-rich nations by coming in, by implementing these. Because, I mean, it's hysterical for Man City to be sponsored by Etihad. Like, that's hilarious. We know that the Sheikh's brother is in charge of Etihad Airlines, and his father is essentially, they don't have a king, but he's the king of the Emiratis. So we know that it's in the words of Julius Malema, it's a family matter. So I mean, this must make the English Premier League very, very nervous, because these guys aren't going to run out of money, and as we've seen now, they are going to get the very best in terms of the barristers to make sure that they legally can fight these cases. And as we said, at the moment on this, it is a draw. So I really do like what you're saying here about that. If you are just joining us, Nqobile Ndlovu, Cash and Sport, we are discussing the fate of the English Premier League versus Man City and some of their charges. So to be clear on this one, the 115 charges that the Premier League, or it's 130 actually, 130 charges, but it's 115, let's just say. This has nothing to do with those, right? Are those still down the road?
Yeah, this is a completely separate matter. On the other side, and I think it's good that you mentioned the fact that Manchester City, in their challenge to the Premier League, had these crazy assertions that the rules were designed against Gulf-specific states, and they were designed to make sure that Manchester City and Newcastle, as Gulf-owned teams, can't prosper, etc., etc. So the league won in that respect. But the 116 charges are still upcoming. So this is basically a little fisticuffs on the sidelines of a war. The war itself is ongoing. It's 116 charges, and that is a much, much bigger mountain to climb for Manchester City. But I mean, we expect a ruling on that one quite soon, because the hearings already started last month in September.
And why isn't that hearing public? Is it not of public interest? Why is it that we can't have access to that? Have they given a particular reason as to why that has to happen behind closed doors?
Oh, I don't know, MKT. I think it's just because it's such a sensitive issue that, and it's such a problematic issue for the league. I don't know why those rulings are not public. I would think it is. It is a public issue. And the other crazy thing is that football teams in England are public benefit organizations. Their finances are public. I don't understand why. I don't understand why. It should be public, but I don't make the rules.
Hey, that's very, very humble of you to acknowledge that you don't make the rules. You don't make the news. You just report. Another thing which you brought up a bit earlier, which I want to go back to, is part of the case where Man City have the Premier League dead to rights was the infusion of interest-free loans by clubs like Chelsea, like Arsenal. Is these interest-free loans. Newcastle and in this case Man City have argued, hey, what about those? Why haven't you said those are the same as what we're doing? And that was really Premier League caught with your pants down, because it's easy for Stan Kroenke, who's owns more property in America than anybody and is part of the Walton family. They've got more money than ever. It's easy for him to say, right, here's 500 million a year interest-free loan, which is impossible to access if we're doing things properly. It's not that different, is what Man City are arguing, than Etihad essentially going, hey, here's a £1 billion sponsorship a year, really. So they've really nailed them on that one, and I think that could be a tricky one for the Premier League to get out of.
Yeah, this one they've properly nailed the league, and the biggest losers in this one will not only be the Premier League. Well, the Premier League will just change the rules. But clubs like Arsenal, who have massive owner support, clubs like Everton, who are they're on their knees basically at the moment, but they're lucky that they've got a takeover now. Clubs like that are really going to suffer, because essentially what the outcome of the ruling is that, well, it's actually true that at the moment anyone can pump money into their club, and Manchester City essentially the ruling outcome basically found that the current rules with regards to that just don't work, need to be adjusted, and anyone whose owners pump money into the club, they will need to be fair value too. And you can't just pump money into your club at and just expect your club to benefit from it in these interest-free, vague loans. There has to be some sort of clarity in terms of what is the value, when is the return expected of these loans, etc., etc. And Manchester City were quite right in that respect. And again, the Premier League is caught with their pants down with rules that don't quite beat, they don't quite meet the mustard. They've been caught with their pants down way too many times in recent memory.
Which is quite astonishing. 0788 777716 if you'd like to get involved in this conversation regarding the state of the bureaucracy of the Premier League versus the might and power of the financial muscle from the Gulf states, in this case Manchester City. But you better believe, I always hear in law, now I'm no lawyer, I know nothing about it, I'm just a guy who has a microphone in front of me, but I always hear that the most dangerous and most important thing when you do things like this is setting the precedent. The precedent is a massive part of things here, is how this goes will obviously, because you better believe Qatar is watching. Don't you dare think the Qataris aren't watching after their failed Man United bid. They will come and buy a Leicester or whatever. Depending how this goes, the other Gulf states might go, oh, okay, now we can come in, should the conditions be right for us to be able to fund a Leicester and turn them into a super club quickly. We can see that the PIF or the Saudis really are here with Newcastle already. So the precedent from this will be absolutely massive. And what is the old adage in investment? They say if the New York Stock Exchange sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. Well, if the English Premier League sneezes, the whole football world catches a cold, whether UEFA want to admit it or not, whether FIFA want to admit it or not. This is the epicenter of global football power. Whatever happens here tends to sort of disseminate into the rest of football. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, Mr. Cash and Sport.
No, you're completely right. The Premier League is the biggest and most powerful league in the world. They are that. I think what will happen is that once Manchester City get their way and this whole process is done, it will probably open the floodgates for the future for others to come in, because if the Premier League can't stop you from being able to fund your club at whichever way you want, they will come in and say, okay, well, there we go. I mean, if you remember what they did to Abramovich, for example, during that time when he left, and then they went and tried to attach the assets of the club and all of that. It was crazy time. But Abramovich left, and he didn't go and fight it in court. This is just opening the can of worms to say, well, if City can fight in court, what's stopping anyone else from doing it? And it's just going to be crazy town. I think the league will try to change the rules, but I think it's too little, too late. And the fact that Manchester City has been brave enough to take them to court, they're just not going to stop, because they keep on seeing that every time you press the issue, the league is found wanting. So what's to stop it from happening again and again and again and again?
Go ahead, Kif.
Yeah, I mean, there's the fair financial fair play rules, the PSR, and the APT rules. I mean, they were always brought in initially, I think around about the time 2008, supposedly to protect the little teams, but they're not. They're basically just entrenching the top teams. And instead of making what was supposed to be the biggest crime in football, which is debt, basically it just made allowed them to take that debt and pretend that, no, it's not so bad, we'll be okay. So it's basically entrenching the people at the top. It has not helped the small teams. It's not helped Leicester. It's not helped Portsmouth. It has not helped the small teams like Arsenal and Chelsea.
Man United.
Man United.
I see where you went there. I could see exactly where you were going there, Kev.
Damn it.
Very journalistic of you to think you could sneak one under the door there. Absolutely not. I'm on my best and brightest. I got new glasses today. I see the world very, very clearly. I knew what you were going to try and do there. All right, Mr. Cash and Sport, if you can stay with us, because football seems to be happening more in the courts than it is on the football pitch these days. Lassana Diarra has won a case with the European Court of Justice. We want to discuss that with Mr. Cash and Sport as well. What does that mean for the transfer market, the movement of players, and why was it legally binding for them to give him the victory in the not only a CAS but in the ECJ? We'll talk about that on the other side. Omni Sport Breakfast.
This is Omni Sports Breakfast with Kevin McCallum and MKT.
If you are just joining us, we are with Mr. Cash and Sport. We've just discussed the fate of the English Premier League moving forward in terms of the Gulf states, in particular Man City. really bullying the Premier League, not just financially, but with its barristers in court. And essentially, some people are saying 1-0 Man City. The Premier League has released statements. And now Man City have come out and said those statements are misleading in terms of how sort of the tribunal has gone. So we are just at the beginning of this, it looks like, because Man City, the one thing they're not going to run out of is money. And once you've got money, you can take this right down to the sewer if need be. But we'll have to move on from Man City. Let's talk about another landslide of a case or sort of seismic case for football and where it could go. Lassana Diarra was in court over the last few years, but essentially a judgment was passed last week where Lassana Diarra he's won, really, on paper. We don't know whether it'll change anything in the long term, but let's find that out. Mr. Catchensport, what was this case all about with Lassana Diarra, and what has the European Court of Justice ruled in his favor?
Yeah, so it's Lassana Diarra is, as people might remember him, and a lot of people should, he was a very good footballer, played for Real Madrid. In 2013, he signed a contract with Lokomotiv Moscow in Russia, right? That contract was supposed to run until 2017. In 2014, Lokomotiv Moscow terminated his contract, right? And he left, basically. They said he was unfit to play. They cut his wages, etc., so he left, right? Following him leaving, he tries to go and join another club. Lokomotiv Moscow says, well, this guy left, he owes us money. They try to get that money back from him of the wages that they had paid him, because they claimed that he didn't meet his contract and all of that. Ultimately, Lassana Diarra then took the case to FIFA. FIFA didn't deal with it. They said, go back and speak to Lokomotiv Moscow. He then took the court to the Court of Arbitration Sports. The Court of Arbitration for Sports did nothing. They just pushed it back, and they ultimately also then awarded Lokomotiv Moscow an award. And he then appealed and took the case to the European Court for Justice, the ECJ. So remember, this is almost 10 years ago, because we're in 2024 now. This case is ongoing from 2013. Ultimately, the ECJ then said, well, you can't stop a player, because what Lokomotiv Moscow had done is that because they had appealed, FIFA had stopped Lassana Diarra from signing with another club, because Lokomotiv Moscow held this cash over him and said, we want our money back for the time that you were here. And they didn't allow Lassana Diarra to sign with another club. The ECJ then said, well, you can't stop a player unilaterally from signing with another club and having freedom of movement as an employee because you have a case ongoing with someone else. Someone can leave your state of employment, still go going through the CCMA and settle the case later on. You can't stop them from being able to be employed. Essentially, that's the crux of the matter.
Wow, and that's massive. You know, once Europeans start to talk about things like freedom of movement, their rights, like that's big there. You know, those individual rights, is people are not willing to not have their summer holidays in Europe. Like that is massive. Especially these players are millionaires. They also aren't, like, we're not talking about the crumbs that you and I. Well, I mean, you do very well. You're a smart guy. You're very successful. But they're not talking about the crumbs that I have to earn. You know, they are talking about millions of euros, millions of pounds here are at stake in terms of player movement. And there's all sorts of conversations that could obviously stem from this. Kev, what you got for Nqobile in this case?
Well, I want to know if this is another Bosman case. I mean, how much can this change the transfer market in the EU and possibly globally?
Yeah, so I think this is another Bosman case. There were three main elements to this case, right? Whether FIFA's transfer regulations, particularly relating to contracts, were lawful, whether the European Commission's decision not to pursue Lassana's case or the CAS's decision not to pursue the case was lawful, and whether the extent to which FIFA's regulations with regards to player movements may be unlawful. If you remember the Bosman case, it essentially said you can't hold players to transfers indefinitely, and it's allowed for players to reach a point where they could sign on a free transfer, and move to another club, because clubs couldn't unilaterally just extend a player's contract. There had to be rules and regulations as to the term of a player's contract. I think in this particular case, there will be changes to the rules, and FIFA's rules with regards to transfers will strengthen players' rights, will strengthen players' unions. FIFA will also not be able to have unilateral rules that state whether a player can move to another club or not, etc., and when they can move. Those rules will have to be in compliance with laws and regulations in individual jurisdictions, because previously FIFA's rules didn't really have to comply. FIFA could state the rules as FIFA as a global body, and you would just have to comply whether the rules were fit for purpose in your country or not. But what Lasana Diarra has done has basically opened up a can of worms for FIFA, because you can't just impose rules as FIFA and not have them comply with EU law. It's going to be hugely problematic for FIFA. And it's essentially what this says is that EU law trumps FIFA's laws and regulations. So I think there will be crazy changes. Actually, while researching this case, I spoke to a couple of football agents who are also lawyers, and they said that there will be problems for FIFA. The challenge though will be what happens at specific jurisdiction level for countries. Like, say, for instance, in South Africa, what happens in that case? What do our laws say in relation to this case and in relation to freedom of movement and the transfer of players? It's going to be interesting, because I don't know whether we even have rules, that speak to this on a local level.
Well, that is very interesting, because for me, the one thing, it's interesting that you say FIFA can't impose unilateral laws. The one thing that is observable in behavior that is unilaterally true is that one thing billionaires do not like is losing power. It doesn't matter whether you're African, European, Australian. The one thing billionaires don't like to do is let the bureaucrats in. You've seen it in America. There's a reason why those 32 owners do not let the bureaucrats into the NFL. There is a very good reason for that. Number one, we don't want you looking at our books. But number two, we don't like you making rules for us. I'm already rich. When ungena pila is basically what billionaires will say to you. Here's my problem for players. Right, I'm a proponent of players. But for players, one thing they must realize, there will be unintended consequences, because if billionaires see players, right, getting more rights like this, and they can essentially, quote unquote, unless I'm misreading this case, is that they'll be able to break contracts easier. Now, what the billionaires will say is, okay, well then why am I giving you a 4-year deal? What we'll do is we'll go year by year, because if you can get out of it easily, I don't want to be bound to a guaranteed 4-year payment for you, because the players will want that guaranteed payment. So that could be interesting to watch as well, the structure of contracts moving forward, should this case actually be lead to legal ratification across the board, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think at the moment, but remember, football works in such a way because the 4-year contract allows stability. It allows for the player to be stable. It allows for the club to be stable. You can kind of book that value in your financials now, and earn off of that value in 4 years. Because remember, when a club buys a player, if it's 100 million, right, and the player signs a 5-year contract, right, you book that player's value in your books right now. So he allows you to book that value, but you don't pay that money back immediately. You pay it off over 4 years, so you break it up into chunks. I'm not so sure that the billionaires would want to disturb that, because ultimately it allows them to inflate the value of their club in the short term while earning out of the player in the long term. But be that as it may, you're quite right in saying maybe it's in some instances they might look at it and say, no, we don't want to be beholden on this issue for too long. We will give you a shorter contract with much more stringent rules and requirements in order for you to meet your full bonus structure, etc., etc. I think it might definitely lead to a restructure in the way that contracts are spelled out and how we put together these agreements. But I think the bigger issue is, what will FIFA do? Because they've had their wings clipped, and they're not as powerful now as they were before. The individual clubs, remember, because players are never contracted to FIFA, they're contracted to clubs, and the clubs then make the decisions in terms of the contracts, the individual contracts. So I think the bigger issue is with regards to FIFA and their global power. They're now probably a little bit less powerful than maybe, let's say, UEFA. They're trying everything under the sun to make themselves more powerful and to keep that power. So I wonder what they're going to do.
The landscape is shifting under FIFA's feet. Mr. Cash in Sport, he is Africa's leading business analyst in terms of the sporting field. Mr. Cash in Sport, that's where you can find him on social media everywhere. Appreciate your time this morning, brother. Incredible stuff. Football is changing. Money is changing everything. And that's just the way it is. The trains are going to have to move forward. I mean, we'll keep an eye on this case, and obviously we'll have you back to keep sort of disseminating this information to the people as you do. You're brilliant, bro. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, MKT. Pity we couldn't get into the cricket side of things, but a quick take on that one. India, Australia, and England are far too powerful. Their wings need to be clipped to allow for cricket to have balance again and to allow for just the good old cricket that we know. But anyway, I'll talk to you guys soon.
No, we'll talk to you soon. We'll definitely discuss that and pick that up and really delve into the cricket economics a little bit more moving forward. Nqobile Ndlovu, Mr. Cash and Sport there. All right, let's answer our question of the day. Liverpool had Al Hadj Diouf and Sadio Mane. Everton had Idrissa Gueye. From which West African country do they all hail? Kev, the answer there is
Senegal. And I remember the best sand Al Hadj Diouf based on his 2002 World Cup.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. He had a great World Cup.
He did have a great World Cup. He also spat in someone's face. It seems to be a Liverpool thing, according to him and Jamie Carragher. It's okay to spit in humans' faces. It's not okay, by the way. But great player. Al Hadj Diouf never quite worked out at Liverpool, but a superb player for Africa. Well, that is it for today's show. Join us tomorrow as we bring you the greatest of sport from Africa and around the world.
Listen live and on demand.
Welcome to Omni Sport.